We haven't rented the R5 yet.
No.
We're hoping to do that next month.
Yep.
So we can talk about that then.
Are you loving yours?
She loves hers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beyond. It's absolutely changed my photography. So
we haven't
yeah.
rented the R5 yet. No.
Oh, somebody's.
And Rick, thank you very much for your critique of the image I sent you. I really appreciated that, and we'll respond.
Okay.
Well, so today we're actually gonna throw in a little mix before we really start talking about mirrorless and the camera industry and just taking questions. Lots and lots of Nikon questions, which we're gonna push to the end. We were talking about maybe in a couple office hours from now, just doing kind of a Nikon Z office hours for the people that just care about that, and those that aren't Nikon can tune out, because we don't want to bore anybody that's Canon or Sony or Fuji. So we're going to talk a little bit about some kind of raw image filters. It's become a popular thing. Matt Kay did a big video about Topaz Denoise AI. David Archer, who's here with us this morning, has been using Topaz Denoise AI and kind of singing its praises. In an earlier version that we looked at back sort of just before COVID hit, when David and I were running a workshop in Kauai, I found it problematic. So we're going to talk a little bit about...
Sorry, guys.
Is that you, Woody?
Yep.
All right. So it had some artifacts, which I thought, well, if you do it as a layer, you could go in and blend and, you know, but it also required you to use a TIFF, and I'm just not a fan of TIFF files. I'd rather have raw files or PSD files. Well, that's changed. The artifacting's gotten better in Topaz Denoise AI, and you can use it on raw files and create DNGs. But about the same time as this kind of new big resurgence and interest in Topaz Denoise came out, DxO came out with a product called Pure Raw. And Rick and I both decided, well, let's try both of these and play around with them a little bit. And I'm actually going to share my screen and just kind of walk through. The thing I don't have them both loaded. I'm not going to run full tests. I only have the trial versions at this point. But I did set up, well, I'll tell you in a second, but I'll just show you the results. Essentially, I will say that I think that the DxO software is a really smooth modern interface where you can just feed it a folder of images, and you can feed it raw files, and it'll just kind of run this pre-filter on your files. It does lens corrections, noise reduction, all this stuff to your image with just a click, and it puts it in a subfolder as a DNG file, which may make me kind of reconsider my position on DNG files, because what's coming out of it is pretty darn phenomenal. I'm going to minimize this guy to kind of get it out of my way here. So I've got some images I ran through it, some old, some new, and some different cameras. You know, here's a Z6 II at 2000 ISO. It's not a terribly noisy image. This is straight out of the camera at 100%. If I run it through Topaz, you can always tell the Topaz, this is the AI clear. And I think David will probably agree. When I was running Topaz, the clear seems to be there's three settings. There's kind of a light, medium, and heavy. And clear is kind of the medium, and it's what I tended to like. It does a beautiful job kind of reducing noise, keeping fine detail. It is pretty darned impressive. You can tell it's Topaz because I've got the watermark. I didn't buy the software. I'm running their 30-day trial. And this is the DxO Deep Prime. It's Pure Raw. Pure Raw. They call it their Deep Prime. This is kind of their
raw and lens correction engine is kind of,
it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And the other thing I notice is that, you know, when I go through, and I haven't, this is just straight out of the raw processor. When I go through and process, it has less artifacts and noise with the DxO for me. I don't know if that's what you found too, as you were running through. I was just really impressed both with the simplicity of the user interface and the quality of the raw file that pops out. So what you would do is bring in your photos from your camera, feed them into DxO Pure Raw, and then it spits out a folder of DNGs, which you import into Lightroom or On1 or whatever your, Capture One, whatever your raw processor of choice is. And here's a really heavy duty. This is a Z50 image at 1600 ISO. So that APS-C sensor, it's not the top of the line sensor. It's got quite a bit of noise. This is the whole image. We're at 100%. That's straight out of the camera. Here's Topaz Denoise AI. Pretty good. There's a little bit of luminance noise left, but if you went into, or I mean, a little bit of kind of more color noise, I mean, that's left over in the shadows. If you go in and do the kind of standard raw processing, I feel like it's moved it from a 1600 ISO image to start processing more like a 400 ISO image. And then you take a look at the, this is another version. This is the heavy duty rendering. This is why I like the clear. So this is Topaz Denoise AI clear. And then this is kind of their heavy duty setting, low light, to see if it did any better. And I see some artifacts, and yeah, it's not my favorite. I would definitely stick with the clear if you're using Topaz Denoise AI. Then you take a look at the DxO Deep Prime, and it's awful. You know, there's a little bit of noise in here, but man, that's going to clean up easily with a pull of the luminance noise slider. Again, this is no sliders touch, straight raw file. So if you take a look back at what the original file looked like,
at 16,000, that's pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing with the little APS-C, the little Z50 sensor. You know, it's a pretty darned incredible result. So then I'll show you one more. This is an old D700 image from 2011 in Bosque del Apache, and it's a 1600 again, a better sensor, but you can see there's some noise in there. Here's the AI clear with Topaz. Amazing detail that it leaves. And here's the DxO. There's just something pretty special about how this is sort of pre-filtering raw files. It gives you a nice image to start editing. I'm pretty darned impressed by it. And just, you know, if you are into checking it out, I put a link. I set up, as soon as I tried it out, I set up a affiliate status with them. And if you go to my links page and you scroll to the top, you'll see I put in a try DxO Pure Raw and a buy DxO Pure Raw link. If you use those, I really appreciate it. But you can try it for 30 days free, and it doesn't even leave a watermark. So I would really say, grab it and check it out. You know, it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't apply to your image after editing. It's a pre-filter.
And that's the way that the Topaz, when they started, it felt like it was an after. It was a finishing product. You know?
Well, especially if you had to go to TIFF.
Right. But, you know, and the other thing I'd say about the DxO product is it feels modern. It you know, the Topaz product's been around for a long time. It's definitely gotten better. And you should check out, if you're interested in all of this, you should check out Matt Kay's video from last week, where he kind of was like, wow, Topaz has really done a pretty good job here.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I will say, and David Archer can chime in here too, Topaz is impressing me versus a year ago. Well, more than a year ago. What were we in Kauai in February, David?
Right.
Yeah. It's impressed me how much less artifacts it has, and the fact that you can feed, you know, a straight up Nikon, Canon, Sony raw file into it, and it'll spit out a DNG. So you can use it as a starting point. The thing that was a little bit disappointing to me, though, is that when I started pulling the sliders, you can't push it as far with the Topaz denoise as a starting point as you can with the DxO. The DxO is just doing something kind of super special with those files.
So David, when you're using denoise, are you using it as a preprocessor as well?
No. I use it just on the images that I really want to work on, but I do it first before any cropping or really anything other than just a little tonal balancing.
Right. And you're still using it on the TIFF file. You're creating a TIFF file.
Yeah.
Right. I'd probably, you can stop doing that now. You can still stay DNG or PSD now with it.
Yeah, that must have been a recent change, because I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, that was when I was watching Matt's video last week. That was kind of what I felt was, okay, they've done something recently here to sort of mix things up a bit. And maybe they got wind the DxO was coming out with something as well. But, you know, DxO has kind of built their heritage on lens corrections and sensor
testing.
Yeah. So they've spent a lot of time doing that stuff. But I think it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you're shooting in high noise situations. You know, so
it does an impressive job. Both of them do an impressive job cleaning out noise and keeping the fine detail where you want it. You know, you want to check both of them and make sure they're not creating artifacts anywhere, but I didn't see that with the DxO. I'm going to start running my keeper images through DxO before I really start editing them. I am.
All of them?
I don't know that I'll do all of my images, but I might start. I'm going to keep testing. I'm going to start testing more. I'll definitely be doing a video before long, but I'm going to start testing more, you know, even low ISO landscapes. Let's see what it does with that. It just seems to me that I can push my boundaries further if that. It's like it's almost like decanting a wine, right? It's like it just improves the file to start working with. It's pretty cool, and it's also not a subscription. It looks like it's a buy it.
Yeah, it's a buy it. Yeah,
which is not. It's like $89
now.
Right now,
it'll be more.
Yeah.
So, I would say that Lightroom, well, Camera Raw's noise reduction is not bad.
No.
But in these types of instances, especially where you've got these huge swaths of sort of noisy background in a 16,000 ISO image, it really does help.
Yeah, and you'll find, as you're working in Lightroom or Photoshop, Camera Raw, or on one's noise reduction and sharpening, it's a balancing act, right? As you do noise reduction, it's blurring fine detail, and so then you have to sort of work to sharpen the details that matter to you back in the image, and you kind of this back and forth. What size detail am I blurring? What size detail am I sharpening? It's this two sides of the coin back and forth balancing act. And it's so much easier to do if it's cleaned up to the point that this software hands you a high ISO file. Then all of a sudden it's not that meticulous, time consumptive. It's just a little pull of the slider. Oh, that looks good. Oh, a little pull of the slider.
Have you tried it on any Astro shots at this point?
No, but I'm going to.
Yeah. There you go, Rob.
Going to. All right. So that was just a little something that happened this week. My interest got piqued by Matt and then the announcement from DxO. And I thought, I wonder how these compare. And I was just a little bit blown away by the DxO. So you hear my take. So let's talk about Mirrorless a little bit. And, I want David to talk just for a second about some of his impressions, because David's the most recent convert in our cohort here. That are our regular speakers that's converted into Mirrorless, and you're such a big D5 camera guy.
I'd say convert's a strong word.
Convert's a strong word. Right,
would imply that he
dabbling. Let's say he's dabbling.
Yes,
Let's say he's dabbling. So maybe what you like, and we've talked a little bit about what you don't like. Well, and Darren too. I think Darren shoots a lot of sports and action, the Timbers games, soccer games, and David shoots a lot of birds and wildlife. So you guys are on.
I am really liking the Mirrorless for a lot of things. Love it for landscape, love the experience. I'm liking it for nature too, except for one particular thing, which is the blackout. So if I'm doing a bird in flight and a long series of images, I'm no longer able to see exactly what's happening. I'm seeing shots that I've already taken, rendering. And so at some point it makes it really hard to follow the bird. And I'm seeing slow images of wings kind of like that, processing in the bird somewhere else. So that's the only thing I found that I don't like. Now I'm used to the Nikon D5, which is just a super camera made for things like that. It's got a bright viewfinder. The blackout time in between the mirror actuations is really very short. And it feels good in my hands. It's a big, beefy camera. It's all titanium body. You could drive a tent stake with it.
Well, I've sadly, happily tested the Z6 and Z7 in some pretty bad falls and water immersion scenarios, and they're built tougher than you think they are for as small and how they feel too. And I think the Canons are built really tough too, from what I've been hearing. Yeah. But I think so the first time I really left my DSLRs behind was the workshop that we did in Charleston, and I brought my D500 just for the birds and wildlife portion of that. And then I left that camera. Maybe I had you ship it back for me, David. And I only took the Z6 and Z7 to Cuba when I left your place. This is like 2 years ago. And so that first time I was doing a lot of photos of the old cars and like panning and slow shutter speed stuff. And I shot a lot of motion, a lot of people moving, street scenes like that. And I was feeling that same way about the stuttery, high-speed continuous capture with the camera, less so than I had with previous mirrorless cameras. But you know, the adjustment that I think I made over time, and it's better with the Z6 II and Z7 II than it was with the Z6 and Z7. And I'm sure what comes next will be better yet. I think they're going to get to the point where it's about the same as a DSLR, but it does have a little stuttery feeling that I've gotten used to. And I think my technique with it is to go a little wider framing, a little more croppable image, so that there's more room for my subject to move around in the frame a little bit as I'm tracking it. And then, and maybe more controlled bursts, you know, being a little more selective instead of which I know as a bird photographer, that may not be optimal, but you know, sort of picking my shots. And that way it's catching up in between, and also just keeping a little wider frame, which is generally kind of beneficial in our days of having 24 or 36 or 46, or now they're going into 60 some megapixels anyway. So just some thoughts on that. But as you said, you know, the landscape, working with it in the landscape, working with it with people or wildlife that it does eye detect tracking on, you know, and I know the Sonys and the Canons are nailing eye detect on almost all wildlife now. Nikon does with some wildlife. I've had it do eye detect with certain birds I'm shooting if they're close up and well framed, with deer, with, you know, it's working for more than cats and dogs, like it's guaranteed to work with. But the human eye detect, like when I'm photographing my children or a model, is just ridiculous. I mean, it's the old trick of, you know, trying to not move much and not have your model move much and dial in the eye and get it all manually focused perfect and just try not to move it all. I mean, this thing, there's a little tiny box you can select whose eye in the frame is the center of attention and just make sure it's perfect. And I get these images where the eye is just razor sharp if my shutter speed's fast enough. And working in the landscape, like in low light, I mean, having that pinpoint AF and nailing a star in a Milky Way, or you know, it's just pretty darned incredible. I saw someone was asking questions about having a hard time if you're out near infinity focusing and then shifting focus to another, and I haven't found that at all. You know, I don't know if you're not using back buttoning or holding your finger down and locking focus or something, whoever that is with the AFS, maybe it's locked, but using back button and tap the screen to pick the focus point, and just, it's amazing. And, you know, the other thing about the mirrorless versus the DSLR is the fact that it's using contrast lines that the sensor actually sees and focusing on the sensor. There's no calibration between an optical autofocus system in the DSLR that's, you know, that's an optical rangefinder dialing in that precise distance that it finds to the subject, to the lens's focus system, and needing to calibrate between the two because maybe there's some degree that's off. You know, so you wind up with, if you fine tune a mirrorless camera with lens correction, you know, lens focusing correction software, you usually find that there's not much calibration to do. It's just kind of dead on accurate, because it's not a dual system that way. It's just focusing on what the sensor sees.
David, one other question, not to put you back on the spot, but can you find, other than the issue that you're talking about, is there any real advantage to the optical viewfinder?
That's the only one I can think of.
Yeah. I mean, I you know, this is the thing that you know, I went into mirrorless early. I mean, I went whole hog into the very first Sony generation, and the electronic viewfinder was pretty bad. I mean, it was good. I mean, it was a step forward, but I found that I kept missing that optical viewfinder. And it took a couple of revs. I mean, with the A7R3, you know, Sony just kind of nailed it with the Z series, you know. I think the fact that these electronic viewfinders now are just so high resolution that, you know, it's like you don't even need to take your eye off the away from the viewfinder.
It's funny because Rick was talking about how you were you were a convert.
Yes, I was a convert.
I dabbled back in 2011. I bought a Panasonic GH2 with its little mini lens kit because I was thinking, oh, this will be perfect for the expedition type stuff that I do. You know, I can take this up Denali and I found that, you know, that was that micro four thirds sensor. It was noisy the minute you got above 400 ISO. But the bigger problem to me was that the viewfinder, everything just looked like something between an old 4:3 black and white TV and, you know, a tubed color TV. I was like, this just does, I can't make heads or tails of what the scene really looks like through this viewfinder. And it immediately got sold on eBay. I mean, I used it for 6 months and got some images I liked, but it was hard to work with that EVF. And, you know, Rick and I were friends as he was buying the first, you know, you got the RX1 and the Sony A7. Yeah. And I played with it and I thought, these are neat. I like the way the level works on the screen. I like that I can see the menu, but I don't like anything about this compared to the viewfinder in my Nikon D810 at the time.
Yeah.
I was like, I want that optical viewfinder. And then David and I were, you know, we were off in teaching a workshop, which Ron was a part of on Mount Rainier when they announced the Z6 and Z7. And I pre-ordered the Z6 like that night in the cabin saying, well, I'm going to test this thing, say I don't like the viewfinder and send it back. Yeah. And my D850 is all the camera I ever need. And then it got here and I shot with it for a couple of weeks and I was like, well, I'll be damned. And my D850 sat collecting dust and I fell in love with it. It was the viewfinder.
He really was. Before the Z showed up, he's like, I'm going to use them for a week and I'm going to send them back.
I'll just say why I don't like them.
Yeah. So,
but no, I haven't barely picked up a DSLR since that day.
So Pentax just announced or just came out with a DSLR. Wow. And DP Review said it was not bad.
Yeah.
But we had a couple of people asking questions about it. Thought, you know, are Canon and Nikon going to announce any new DSLRs at this point, do we think, moving forward?
Not unless they're so far down the pipeline.
Well, so Canon announced recently that they're discontinuing the EF lenses.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the bell there.
Yeah.
Nikon seems to be kind of all over the map in terms of what they announce and what they don't announce. You know.
Well, you know, they did announce that they were going to focus on mirrorless.
Yeah.
I would imagine that they will continue producing the lenses that aren't covered by the newer, better lenses like the 500 PF and the 300 PF that aren't covered by the Z system. But you could see that they're bringing out the big, you know, 5-figure primes. Yeah. And the new Z9 is coming and they're gonna, I don't see much happening. What the question is whether they may still be producing some little intro level, you know, for mom with the kids, smaller plastic DSLRs like they sell so many of.
I mean, like the Rebels, the digital Rebel,
like the Canon's Rebel line.
I have a hard time seeing them even keeping that up.
Well,
they might keep them.
I think they're still selling. Yeah. You know, they're at Costco and Walmart and, you know, your department store, and people are picking those up to get better photos of their kids than their phone. And I think until they can get their production set up to make really cheap mirrorless that are amazing, maybe APS-C, and then they may continue producing some of those lower end, but I don't think you're going to see high end DSLRs produced anymore. I really don't. I think the D780 from Nikon is going to be it. I think that the 5D Mark IV is probably
right. And it was interesting that Canon announced sort of their answer to the Sony A1 and the Nikon D9 Z9.
That isn't even
well, but the Canon's the same way. It's not even
we're announcing we're doing it. Yeah.
Right. But the weird thing was that they were announcing that it was sort of in between the R5 and the 1DX Mark IV. Like they were not saying that it was going to replace, you know, their high-end camera, which had a lot of people perplexed. But
they don't want to cannibalize sales on that quite yet.
And all we're getting is a picture and some very light specs. So
I saw. I mean, Nikon even disclaims that the picture of the Z9 is actually going to be the Z9. Yeah, like images may differ from actual product.
Yeah.
It's like an artist's rendition of what this thing looks like at this development stage.
Yeah.
I saw somebody saying, "I'm waiting for the Z9." I was like, that might be a long wait. You know? I mean,
because there was some speculation that a lot of this stuff was going to be in time for the Tokyo Olympics this summer, but
No.
These cameras have been in the works for quite a while, you know, and it's too late to really do anything at the Olympics for these guys.
Maybe some people testing prototypes.
Yeah, but I don't know how much I would, if I were a professional photographer shooting.
That's true.
Sports,
Yeah, if you're at
I
the
don't know that I'd
Olympics.
be using a prototype.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But so one of the other things that's interesting, we keep saying this over and over again, but you know, there were a couple of people who were asking about, what system should I jump into? And the reality is that, you know, I don't see how you can go wrong right now buying mirrorless from pretty much any of the major companies.
Yeah.
You know, Sony, Canon, Nikon are all sort of top of the game.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Panasonic's doing really well, especially if you've got a video bent.
Mm-hmm.
And Fuji's doing some great stuff. I mean, they're doing medium format,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which is a funny thing to me. You know, medium format made sense, you know,
In the film days.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But and Ben loves his, you know.
Yeah. I think as long as you're not shooting really, really long lenses.
Yeah.
I mean, if you like shooting long lenses, birds and wildlife, sports, you know, then medium format suddenly becomes.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a niche like it was a niche before.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, but I'm just looking at some of the questions here. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, I would say that Sony was still sort of at the top of their game.
Mm-hmm.
Nikon sort of poked in, and then everyone was like, "Where's Canon?" And then Canon came out with the R5 and the R6.
Yeah.
You know, and everybody I know who uses those cameras loves them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, our friend Scott, Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the camera. If Canon had come out with that around the time that the first Sonys came out, I probably never would have switched.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
So.
No, it's funny. I just filmed approaching the scene. I'm going to be down near Al in Florida this next week, visiting my in-laws and playing on the beach with the kiddos. We're all vaccinated and we're making our first trip. So I have some ATSs kind of queued up for while I'm gone. And I shot an ATS with my good friend Josh Heidman, who's this just incredible adventure photographer. And he tried switching to Sony mirrorless just to have lighter weight, because he goes into he's on like Nat Geo expeditions into caves where you have to rappel 800 feet down the mouth of it, and, you know, secret caves in Mexico and these just insane trips. Yeah. And his Sony didn't, you know, I think it was maybe the A7 II, I can't remember, but he destroyed a couple with weather and rough handling. And so, you know, he's gone back to his Canon. He's shooting 5D Mark IV. But he's thinking about the R5. Yeah. You know, he's like, I just want to hear some serious durability testing. Yeah. And I told him about my experience getting hit by a wave at Thor's Well. I was shooting with my Z7 and I had it up on the tripod, and the wind was blowing really strong from the north. And I had my good friend Charlie Johnson watching out. You know, he's a good sea guy. He's watching for a big wave, but some combination of waves and it just blew up, and about, I don't know, 20 gallons of water blew right over my head and the tripod and the camera, salt water, you know, and I just immediately ducked out of the way of any more waves, ran off to the side, took a Camelback full of water and poured a liter of water over the camera. I was literally had my screen open. I'm cycling the lens, zoomed and unzoomed, pouring water over it, left it in the wind for 10 minutes. And I've been shooting with it ever since. It never had a glitch. So
Rob wants to know if you got the shot.
Yeah, I did. And actually there's a video that if you search for how tough or Nikon, how tough or something like, or tough, you'll find it on my ATS page. There's a video, and our good friend Rebecca was shooting at the time, and so I got a whole sequence of the wave hitting me. So that's in the video too. And then I repeated pouring water all over the camera in the video, and it's still the same camera I have today. It's never had a problem. So they're definitely, you know, I think, and I'm sure Canon's the same way. They've been building tough, robust things for pros to take into deep wilds and war photography situations for decades. They know how to do it.
I love the 5D Mark, the original 5D and the 5D Mark III were just amazing cameras for me.
I shot a fair bit with a Mark II. I did some
Yeah.
underwater work with one.
Yeah.
So shall we roll through a few more
I think
questions?
most of the other questions we've kind of answered. I mean, I think a bunch of the questions were about the EVFs. And the thing that I would say to people who hear, they either look through a mirrorless camera 3 years ago and we're like, oh, well, I couldn't see that. That's not better than an optical viewfinder.
Yeah.
If you look at the current crop of EVFs out there, most of them are pretty good. Actually, the one that I think is the least good is Sony's A7 III, which is basically took the EVF from the A7 II when they moved to the A7 III. It's a beautiful camera otherwise, but
they didn't give it the good newer viewfinder.
They did not,
Yeah.
and because I would love to have sort of a lower resolution.
Yeah, Z6 style.
Yeah,
I think it's the same sensor.
Yeah.
So,
but
I'll go through a little list of the things that I'm most enamored with the Z cameras, and I'll say, the way I've got my controls mapped, the minute I want to check focus, all I do is touch the little OK button on the back while I'm looking through my viewfinder, and it zooms into 100% on my focus point, and I can manually tweak it if I want. And the minute I start manually tweaking it, I have it set to have a little bit of focus peaking so that I can just see the edges glow, not enough to be distracting. And I set it to white, so it's not some color that kind of messes with my view of the scene. But I can also set up in a landscape situation and at the aperture that I'm at, kind of dial in that depth of field, just looking at the focus peaking, whether the bushes from foreground to background are peaking just a little bit when I'm manually focusing. I can zoom in while I'm looking through the viewfinder. I can be shooting and tap play. If I'm using a long lens, for example, I've usually got it on my function button programmed on the lens, and view the image I just shot, run through them without ever looking out of the viewfinder, zoom into 100% in bright sunny conditions. I can change menu settings without taking my eye out of the viewfinder. And the other thing that's nice for a person like me that, I'm 2010 further away than this, but I can't see my phone without my reading glasses at this point. And adjusting my diopter means I don't need my reading glasses to do photography at all. When I set up on the tripod, I'm still working through, instead of live view on the back, I'm adjusting my menus through that diopter adjusted viewfinder in the dark. And it's just, there's so much that I love doing through that viewfinder. And the fact that as the conditions get darker, let's say, I think this was a thing I noticed first in Havana. I'm out shooting at dusk in these street scenes with old cars and interesting people in doorways and things, and it's dark. If I was shooting through my DSLR, I'd be kind of squinting to see what I'm framing up, because it's not going to make it brighter. But shooting through the mirrorless, depending on your setting, you can have it show you what the exposure is going to look like. And so it's just boosting the ISO for the live view for you to see what you're shooting. And all of a sudden those darker scenes are brighter in the frame while you're working with it. You're seeing what you're going to get. And that's particularly true. Early days, I thought, well, there's no way I could ever use mirrorless for night sky photography or Milky Way photography. And that was true. You'd look through that viewfinder and all you'd see was sort of purple color noise glowing in the frame as it tried to boost the ISO beyond comprehension. Well, now it's nice and clean, and you start seeing little spots, and you run that are stars or a planet in particular, and you run your little pinpoint autofocus with your low light autofocus setting on over that star, punch in, zoom to 100%, hit autofocus, it zooms in. Boom, all of a sudden you've got the stars in focus. I mean, it's a complete revolution when it comes to shooting night skies, having that electronic viewfinder compared to an analog one at this point. And, I will agree with David. It takes a little getting used to doing burst high-speed photography because there is that little feeling like you're watching a slideshow, but it's gotten faster and faster and faster and faster to where I can work with it, having practiced it enough. I'm just not taking.
And that's with the review image feature off.
Yeah. It just feels a little stuttery.
Yeah.
I agree
one
with
of the
you,
things.
Hudson.
What's Darren saying right there?
I agree about that. It takes some getting used to, but it's not. I'm still kind of working through it, but it's better than I thought it would be. An image review turning that off was the first way to fix it, right? something jumped in from YouTube while I got you. When you're talking about focus peaking, are you just grabbing the focus ring and just moving it to get that? Just going from auto into kind of manual off the lens? Okay.
Yeah.
We had one question from someone about focus systems. Are they really that different? And that, there's definitely been some development over the last couple of years.
You mean brand to brand?
Yeah, brand to brand.
Yeah, there is no doubt that when it comes to subject tracking, Sony's ahead.
Yeah.
And I think I haven't used the R5. I know the R5 is really good too.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that Nikon is great. It's just, it takes work to learn how to do it, which I think has always been true of doing wildlife and sports and action focusing in the past. I think that Sony and Canon have made it easy for the novice. It's easy to highlight your subject, whoop, this little green boxes around it. And Nikon needs to get there and make it a little bit simpler. Nikon's subject tracking works great, but you have to be able to move from auto area, autofocus, where it's choosing everything for you, because that works in most situations, to that situation where it isn't, and have it become muscle memory to tap, there's your box to do subject tracking, then get the box on the subject and hold the autofocus. I mean, it works great,
right?
But you need to learn how to do it. You got to have that become muscle memory. It takes practice. And I'll say there's nothing better to practice on than kids or grandkids running around the yard. I've spent so much time, focusing on my kids in the yard. They've just been a fantastic way to get good at that. And then when you're out in nature, I find myself having no problem getting 90% keepers when I'm shooting with the Z cameras now, but I've been practicing for 2.5 years, and they've been getting better every single firmware update, which
they've got another one coming this week, right?
There's another one coming this week that's supposed to improve subject tracking on the Z6 II and Z7 II, and add one of the cool things. They keep updating the old bodies, which is pretty impressive. They're going to add that remember focus position, save focus position. I think that's a settings menu item that you guys should check if you're using the Z6 II and the Z7 II. And soon, when you do the firmware update on your original Z6s and Z7s, you're going to get that added to the setup menu. And when you activate that, wherever you were focused with an S lens, or any of the Z lenses, wherever you were last focused, let's say you're doing astro and you have a perfect focus on space. If you suddenly need to change batteries, if you turn it off, it goes back to sort of infinity. When you turn it back on, what it thinks infinity is, and you need to refocus everything. Well, with that thing set, you can turn it off, pull the battery out, put a new battery in, turn it back on, and it doesn't shift the focus. You can take the lens off, and if you put the same lens back on, it'll remember. You can spin the barrel around. It'll be exactly where it was focused last. And that's a really cool feature for doing long exposures.
For focus by wire,
which
in general has not been one of our favorite things.
Right. It kind of solves that problem that you don't have a manual connection to your focusing mechanism in the lens. The fact that it will remember exactly where you were when you shut it down is really, really nice.
And we're talking about going out in the field next month, or not long afterwards. We're going to rent an A1 and an R5 and some lenses, and go out and play with all of these systems. I'm actually looking forward to that. I want to see the blackout free, whatever it is. 30 frames a second that the A1s get.
Well, I did shoot with DC. David and I both shot with DC's A9. Doing birds and wildlife in Charleston, and it did impress. Didn't it, David?
It did.
He was like, I remember you being, your comment was something like, damn. That's a pretty impressive statement from David Archer.
So. Bruce asked about limited sensor manufacturers. Basically, Canon's doing their own sensor for the new stuff, and Sony's pretty much making sensors for the full frame guys. Well, for Nikon.
Although it sounds like Nikon, the Z9 might be a Nikon sensor. It sounds like it. I think sensor manufacture is such a specialized thing that, that was one of the things when Canon came out with the original D30, their first DSLR, digital SLR, they had it was their own CMOS sensor that they used. And that was one of the reasons it was so beautiful. I mean, the images from that sensor were just amazing. They look so different from anyone else. Johnny Scott loved that.
Yeah.
Remember, yep. We had long talks about the CMOS sensor.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. I mean, I really think there's a narrowing in a way of everybody's stuff is amazing right now. That's the honest truth. We're talking about degrees of difference here.
yeah.
And I think Nikon and Canon have done a pretty amazing job of playing catch up. Canon potentially even better. I don't know. I mean, they're both.
Yeah, I'm really interested to play with the R5.
Mhm.
I'm really interested to see that.
There are some things for landscape shooters in particular with the Nikon though, like the built-in focus stacking and the low light autofocus, the remembering focus position. Some of these things are pretty
I
sweet.
think, as from a Sony perspective, I find that the Nikon does these little things, like the focus stacking.
Mhm.
I mean, it took Sony 4 revs to get
Intervalometer.
Yeah, an
You had to buy an
intervalometer, yeah.
app, remember? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing that when I pick up, your Z6, I shoot with it. It's just it takes me back to the D800. It's just such a comfortable camera to shoot with.
Mhm.
So
Refinements.
yeah,
Yeah.
they just don't seem to do a very good job of marketing it.
No, God. No, they don't. Another thing I discovered that Nikon's marketing department doesn't even tell you, for those of you Nikon shooters out there, if you have the 14 to 24 millimeter lens, is that the hood that holds the 112 millimeter filters, which I've kind of fallen in love with, Case's magnetic 112 millimeter filters, that hood fits on the 14 to 24 2.8. It fits on the 14 to 30 f4. It fits on the 24 to 70 2.8, and it fits on the 70 to 200 2.8. So that one hood that holds 112 millimeter filters can fit every single lens in your bag, pretty much, which is, I don't know why they don't tell everybody that, and market that thing. Say, you buy one set of filters and you'll have vignette free stackable filters for all your glass. But I don't know. Their marketing department, their engineering, they're not keeping up with engineering. So,
where do you find focus stacking?
on the Nikon,
Yeah,
it's in the shooting menu. It's called focus shift shooting, I think. In the shooting menu, the little camera symbol, and you roll down to near the bottom, and it's called focus shift shooting, second from the last item in the shooting menu.
Focus shift shooting. Okay, thank you.
You focus on the closest point in your frame, and you tell it how dense you want the shots. For serious macro photography, like a fly's eyeball at 2 to 1, you want to put the interval at 1. So it barely moves focus at all. For the landscape, you can set it somewhere between 5 and 10. So it makes big shifts if you're at f11 in the landscape, so you have plenty of coverage. And then you just tell it to go, and it'll do silent shooting. It'll just move the focus a little bit, till you hit infinity. And then when it hits infinity, I find it often misses that by just a little bit. So I would just recommend putting your hand in front of the camera, taking a picture, then send it into focus shift shooting with the closest frame to the end, then focus in infinity perfectly zoomed into 100%, take one more shot, then shoot your hand again, and you're done.
Well, I guess we're into Nikon time.
Yeah, I guess we are into Nikon time. Well, it's the last 18 minutes. If you guys aren't Nikon, you may get bored here. We'll take some Nikon questions.
Most of the questions this week were actually Nikon questions. So,
okay.
Let's see. Is there any real reason to go to sell your Z6 and buy a Z6 II? I mean,
well, it's funny. I mean, the save focus position reduces one of those reasons.
Yeah.
That they're going to give that to the Z6 and Z7. It has a much deeper buffer. If you're an action sports wildlife shooter and you like to shoot lots of frames, and you're going to find yourself running out of buffer with the Z6, certainly with the Z7, and the Z6 II and Z7 II. The Z6 II in particular feels bottomless in the same way that the D500 does, just about. It really does take quite a bit to fill up its buffer with raw files. So it just, everything handles faster, from moving moving your focus point around on the frame, everything's just quicker because it has dual processors.
Yeah.
Its focusing is a little more accurate. It's easier to move between the different focus area modes. They have it laid out a little simpler in the way the menu structure is. But other than that, I mean, it's the same sensor and the same, same image quality. If you're a landscape shooter, there's absolutely no reason. No reason.
Hudson, I guess that would be something that would be interesting, is kind of what, and it's a perceptive thing, right? If you shoot with a Z6 versus a Z6 II, what does the focus or that shutter blackout that David's talking about that is annoying, but I think it impacts me less than it impacts him because I'm panning less, right? I've got people running towards me more than going side to side. But what that looks like between those two cameras, right?
It's a mild improvement. It is a mild improvement. It is improved, but that'd be interesting. I could film that. That's an interesting thing to do. That's a good point. Maybe I'll note that down for a future video.
We still seem to get some comments from people who think that the Z lenses are not the sort of top of the line yet. Is that
that's misguided, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, I really truly think Nikon's lenses are tough to beat right now, and they even the f4 lenses are so sharp edge to edge. Even the lightweight f4 lenses, the 14-30 is a better lens in just about every metric than my old 14-24 2.8, and the 14-24 2.8 S lens is just mind-bendingly good.
Yeah, I would say it was like they took note of what Sony did. Sony did that sort of deal with Zeiss, and when they first came out with mirrorless, they came out with, a 24-70 f4 and a 16-35 f4. And the 24-70 was really not a good lens.
I had that lens. I was not a fan.
16-35 is actually a decent lens. But
but not as nice as your Canon.
No, and not as every Nikon S lens that I've used on the Z6 is just great.
Oh, and this 51.8 is just a dream lens. It's so beautiful bokeh and sharp and fun. I mean, even the little 16-50 pancake DX lens for the Z50 blows my mind with how sharp it is at whatever aperture. It happens to be wide open. It's variable. But also shooting into backlight, I get almost no chromatic aberration. I get almost no flare. I get beautiful sun stars if I stop down with this tiny little cheap, this is the $1,000 kit lens. You get the camera and the lens for $1,000, and it's all of the Z lenses I've used. I haven't had one I didn't like. The 21.8 is the best star lens I've used yet of any brand. They're making phenomenal glass. That's a reason to not be investing in the F mount, because the thing is, you can adapt an F mount lens onto your Z camera. You can't adapt an S lens onto an F mount ever. It's not going to happen.
I still was pretty funny having the Canon 16-35 with the Sony adapter and then the Nikon adapter.
Just
running on the Z6.
Nikon to Sony, Sony to Canon lens, and you're using it on the Z6. That's amazing.
So do you think there's a future for the DX sensors, the smaller sensors?
God, I hope so, because my favorite thing in the world is to have a low megapixel, like 20 megapixel, but great at high ISO, bottomless buffer, fast focusing, fast file handling, action camera to use my long full frame glass lenses with. Suddenly your 70-200 is a 105-300, and your 500 PF lens suddenly becomes a 750. It's not really changing the focal length. All the metrics of the lens are the same, but it's cropping in to even the sweeter projection and giving you the ability to fill the frame with something further away from you. And you don't generally need that high megapixel for your sports and action camera and your wildlife camera. So I love having a big high megapixel landscape camera like the Z7 II that, you run it down to base ISO, set up and meticulously craft images, and they're just spectacular. And then a DX censored action camera. When I had the D850 and the D500, I said that was the dream combination of cameras. And the one thing I really, really, really want from the Z system is the D500 Z lens equivalent or Z camera equivalent. I can't wait till they, and I hope they do. You know, I know that the war is all about full frame.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Sony's, you know, hasn't done a lot with the A6000 line.
No.
And that was for a while. I kind of thought, well, that, you know, they upgrade that, but they're not going that way. It's nice to have a smaller camera too.
And I've shot my 500 on this camera, which with the FTZ adapter and the 500, it suddenly looks like you've got a tiny little box on the back of your lens, but it, you know, in good light, it's fantastic. This little Z50 has the same focusing capabilities as the Z6 and Z7 and a fast frame rate. I think it's 9 frames a second. And it does a great job. I've shot, you just saw, I had that photo that was from the Z50 that was really noisy because it was a 1600 ISO. It was getting late. That's the one thing, you know, you need a really nice sensor, a really nice DX sensor with fast file handling. That's the D500. And that's the one DSLR I'm not getting rid of. You know, my long lens is still the 500 and 300 PFs. So I can have that with me in Yellowstone, sitting ready if the bear is on the side of the road. And I'm going to stick with that for a while until they give me something else. And it's not because of the optical viewfinder, it's because of that amazing DX sensor that just gives me more reach for things that are further away. I love to use long lenses with DX.
Is there any difference between just using a teleconverter and using DX for you? I mean, I've seen you out there with the...
I use the teleconverter too.
Yeah.
with the 1.4 teleconverter and the DX, suddenly my 500 PF is a 1050.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it holds up. It holds up to a 1.4 teleconverter. It stays sharp. So suddenly I've got 1,000 millimeters with the 500. Whereas if I put the teleconverter on my Z7 II or even the D850, I've got, you know, what is it, 700. It's great, but 1050 is better than 700 when you're shooting things far away.
Some of us might not think about buying a DX sensor camera just to get that extra reach.
No, but it's a 1-2 punch. If you're someone who carries two bodies, it's fantastic. It really is to have that full frame. You know, it's the same reason. It's the same reason why medium format is great. You know, the less megapixels that you pack into the real estate of your sensor, the less noise, the cleaner the image. So, you know, that's why I say I don't want my DX camera to be 40 megapixels. I want it to be 20. You know, I want a nice clean image at high ISO. And you know, why I still have the Z6 and the Z7. It's because the 7's great for landscape. The 6 is better for sports and action and things like that.
Yeah. There was one question about, you know, if you had any issues with the FTZ adapter and the old lenses.
But I'm not adapting a lot of weird lenses. I mean, I had really good Nikon glass moving into all this. I have used the 500 PF, the 300 PF, the 70 to 200 FLED before I got the S lens. All of those with teleconverters, the 105 1.4 epic portrait lens, the 105 2.8 macro lens, the 14 to 24, I did the old 14 to 24 F mount. That's it.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a 16 millimeter fisheye or 16 millimeter fisheye, and that's working.
Just make sure you update the FTZ firmware, right?
Yeah, you have to update the FTZ firmware. I actually got out in Ridgefield Wildlife Refuge, and I had the 500 with me the first time I took it out with the Z6 II, and it wouldn't work. I didn't realize that the FTZ needed a firmware, and I was outside data range. It was really frustrating. So
So Dave Hancock asked, why not just switch to DX mode on your Z7?
Well, so
why carry an extra.
I just kind of addressed that to a certain extent. When you do that, so the Z7 or the D850 have more megapixels per square millimeter. Let's make that metric up. It's a metric I'm making up. A square millimeter of sensor space, right? We're packing a whole bunch of little photoreceptors on there, red, green, and blue photoreceptors. And the more you pack into the smaller space, the more noise you get when you turn the ISO up. And when you start working with longer lenses, they don't have as wide an aperture. They have less light gathering ability. And often you're trying to work with wildlife with this long lens whose narrowest aperture is 5, 6, or 4 in low light conditions. So your ISO is ramping up. And if you're using a big landscape camera's 46 megapixel sensor, that starts to get noisy above 800 ISO. So you're introducing this noise to your image that if instead you have a D500's, 21 megapixel full, APS-C sensor, there's a lot less dense. It does better at high ISO. The Z6 absolutely does better at high ISO. I try to keep my Z7 II down to 1600 or below if I can for ISO, just to have a clean image to work with. With my Z6 II, I let it run up to 20,000 and I know I can do noise reduction on it. It's insane, and that's the same size sensor with half the megapixels on it. So it's just a cleaner output. You're not going to, so what I'm looking for is a low megapixel DX sensor that's still, 20 megapixels gives you a beautiful printable file. I have 24 by 36 images all through my house shot with my D700, which was 12 megapixels. So, you don't have as much room to crop. You need to get it right, but you're also getting more reach. So you don't have to crop as much. So.
Two camera upgrade questions over here on YouTube, right? And I think I know your answer to both of them, honestly, Hudson. Got a D810 looking to upgrade, Z7 II or 850? I think your answer there would be Z7 II.
I think the 850 is holding its value right now, and it's a great camera. It's probably the best. I'm biased, but I love that camera. I think it's probably the best DSLR that'll ever be made. I think you're going to see a discontinuation of F mount glass, and you're going to see it become, its price is going to drop. It's going to be impossible to get new lenses. You're going to wish you had those S lenses that are so much better than the F mount lenses. The glass is so much better, and the technology is just getting better and better. If you're going to buy into one system or the other, I think you're either locking yourself into a closed system where there's not going to be any more product development, or you're stepping into the future right now, and it's going to continue getting better and better and better.
I'd agree with that.
So,
and I've got a Z6. Should I buy a Z7 II? Answer: it depends on what you're shooting, right?
Yeah. Are you a landscape person? If you love shooting landscape, you're going to adore. Both cameras are wonderful. I think it's an incremental upgrade. The Z7 is a totally different sensor than the Z6. The Z6 is great in low light, amazing to handhold, good for action and sports and wildlife. The Z7 is a landscape shooter's dream. It's a lot of megapixels, and if you can keep the ISO down and lock in on the tripod, it's just creates spectacular image quality. But if you start cranking it up, you get noise. It's not the hand holder's dream camera, and it exposes weak lenses. If you don't have the very best glass, you're not going to get the best out of it. At 46 megapixels, you need really good glass. It's the thing that really exposes the F-mount glass, is putting it on the Z7 II and testing it side by side with the S glass. You start zooming into the corners. You're like, whoa, that's not sharp at all. Wow, that's razor sharp. They've done something here. So
I've got one last one here. Have you done any sort of comparison work between the CF Express and the XQD? Is there?
I love the new CF Express 2's Type B. It's built more ruggedly. There's more metal, less plastic in the cards. It's more than twice as fast. It's really, really, really fast. I'll have a card filled with video with 128 gigabytes of video, and I plug it into a Thunderbolt 3 port on my PC, and I just watch the line go in. It's crazy. That said, they're expensive. You have to have a new reader. It doesn't work with an XQD reader. You have to have a compact flash express reader. I'm really, really liking the cards from ProGrade cards and ProGrade readers. They're a little bit cheaper and they're great. I have links to those alongside the Z7 II and Z6 II. I think it's definitely the future. You're going to see XQD go away. And in reality, compact flash express 2 the B type should really just be called XQD 3, because that's kind of what it is. There's new SD cards that are also called compact flash express type A. They're only half as fast. They're single
Yeah.
bus versus dual bus.
Yep.
So they have a max speed that's half as fast as the Type B that look like XQD cards.
And that will be one thing interesting to test when we
Yeah.
play around with the A1.
Yeah, it will.
You know, yeah.
The one other bummer for this is not a problem for Mac users, but for some reason Windows hasn't gotten around to coding the operating system so that it recognizes compact flash express type 2 cards as a memory card. It looks at it like it's a blank hard drive being plugged in. And so if I format the card in camera, when I plug it into my PC, I actually have to go into the disk management utility, select this thing that looks like a blank hard drive, right click it, assign a drive letter, and all of a sudden it pops up Nikon Z7 II and all the files are accessible. So it's this little step that's annoying.
Yeah.
And I hope that's Windows' fault, not Compact Flash Express's fault. And to Mac's credit, they did it immediately. So it works fine on a Mac. On a PC, if you plug in your new Compact Flash Express card and its new Compact Flash Express reader and you don't see anything, you didn't do anything wrong. You need to go to disk management and assign a drive letter to it.
Okay. Well, I think that sort of does it for today.
Oh, we want to talk about the next one.
Oh, that's
So
right.
I'm going to be gone for the next 2 weeks. And so we're not doing an office hours in 2 weeks. We're going to do one in 3 weeks. That's May 11. Am I correct?
Let's see here. Yes, May 11.
May 11, Tuesday to 10 a.m. And we want to see your spring photographs. Sorry to spring that on you, Woody. So spring photos, submit your favorite spring image. Should we take any other one image?
Yes, one image.
We'll put them up in a gallery. We'll go through, we'll talk about them, take questions. And
Yeah.
Chris wants to know if he can ask his text questions that day also.
text question?
Tax.
Oh, text question. Well, they extended the deadline, so no.
Yeah.
Or is that the new deadline?
That's the new deadline.
Oh,
Well,
that's
not
the
May
new-
11th, May 15th.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's we can talk about
Yeah.
taxes if you really want to, but
Chris says his Windows 10 doesn't have an issue with the CF Express.
Type
Read
B, really?
So that's what he says.
Wow.
He's throwing some shade on you.
Wow, that's interesting.
All right.
All right.
So spring, 3 weeks.
Yep.
And
3 weeks, May 11th, spring photos, submit them, submit questions, and we will see you then, everybody. It's good to see everyone.